Hello, everybody. It's me, Fee, or Fiona Timms, otherwise known as White Zulu, author of my autobiography of the same name. And I welcome you all to another chapter from my book. I do hope you're all enjoying my life story. And I must thank all of you for being such dedicated subscribers, especially those who write such complimentary messages below my videos. They are much appreciated. I would like to point out that the previous South African flag hanging on the wall behind me is not a political statement. It is simply a piece of history in the background of my first 50 years of life, being born and growing up in my beloved mother country, South Africa. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary and frankly describes my experiences of growing up with the Zulu tribe as my family. That flag is simply a piece of cloth signifying the history of South Africa. It was originally used by the Union of South Africa from 1928 to 1961, when I was 11 years old, and later the Republic of South Africa until 1994. Hello, everybody. It's Fee Timms here, or Fiki, or the White Zulu. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my time in Switzerland at finishing school. Now, I just arrived at this dreary place, and I was now observing my fellow schoolmates. And I'm going to continue with that. This is called Finishing School Part 3. There was a tall, angry Dutch girl called Uta. She had close-cropped hair dyed a shocking shade of orange and always wore black clothing, something Mum never allowed us to do. Black is not for young girls and only for evenings once you're married, was her rule. Uta wore tight-fitting black everything, down to thigh-length stiletto-heeled boots. She would have been a goth or punk, except those were still a long way off in the future. Her attitude was certainly punk, and she must have sensed the rebel in me, as she formed a sort of a friendship with me. I didn't actually like her, but at least she didn't turn her back on me, ostracize me, or make a snide comment about my nationality, which always happened whenever I was around the other girls. Instead, Uta latched onto me and took me into Vevey, usually quite late in the afternoon before supper was served at the school. We often bunked supper, as nobody ever did a head count at mealtimes, let alone any other occasion when we were supposed to be all together in one place, like the Keep Fit classes held on the front lawn, which was supposedly compulsory, but nobody ever turned up. Uta took me to Genevan lakefront bars in Vevey, where we sat and drank glasses of cheap house wine on empty stomachs, smoked and flirted with the Italian waiters. We went to discos and danced with those waiters afterwards, and then just the two of us young girls, drunk and reeling from all that unaccustomed amount of wine. She'd pull off her long black boots, I'd take off my sandals, and we'd paddle in the ornamental fountains along the shores of Lake Geneva, while the moon came up over the water, and boats rocked gently at their moorings, their mast lights reflecting, twinkling in the ripples along with the strings of red, yellow, blue and green fairy lights, which with the council adorned the shorefront all over and around the trees planted there. It was the most beautiful and romantic setting, with the Chateau de Chillon on its island. Sorry, with the Chateau de Chillon, the castle, on its island just offshore, all lit up like a fairy tale castle. I jumped into the fountains after Uta, followed by various young men we'd met or flirted with. By that stage, I was in no condition to know or care what I did. These were handsome, dark-haired young men in their early 20s, all Italian, and all spoke French as they had no English. Often we French kissed them, standing thigh-deep in the water, or cavorted wildly, slipping and sliding around on the slippery floors of these exquisite ornamental fountains, splashing each other, shouting out drunkenly, and certainly making a spectacle of ourselves. The guys loved it and always wanted to follow us home. Uta and I had to shake them off at the closed school gates, though, and sneak in, often sopping wet, to creep up to our dorms undetected and, after changing into our nighties, pretend to the others, sorry, we'd been having a quiet evening in reading, not that anyone ever asked or cared. Even though I appeared to be having the time of my life, I felt deeply uncomfortable about Uta's and my behaviour in such a public place as Vevey. Ever since I'd arrived in Switzerland, Silette had always known where I was and whom I was with. Invariably, Britta, Jonty and I were out on the slopes until dark, by which time we had to be home, and after dark we were only allowed out if we had Louis Ami or Pierre with us, preferably both. Even though I'd always been well chaperoned, it had never felt as such, and although I'd longed for my own boyfriend to hold hands with and kiss in the dimly lit, snug discos, I found this new and totally unsupervised lifestyle overwhelming and rather frightening. I had no idea what, let alone where, the boundaries between boys, now young men, and girls of my age lay. Apart from my previous boyfriend, Gary, whom I'd been going out with from the age of 16, and subsequently Pierre's gentle kisses, I'd never had any experience of the male body at all. I was one of 4 girls. All I'd never seen a white male naked, except for my first nephew born a year ago, before I left South Africa to come over here. Even then, I'd only caught the tiniest glimpse of the infant's little genitalia as my sister bathed him. I'd also seen the little infant children running around at our farm kraal wearing only T-shirts. Apart from that, I was more naive than any 18-year-old ought to be, and here I was in a strange country with a wildly drunk and out of control companion being led on to behave in a way I really wasn't comfortable with. It was a result of having been rejected. Sorry, still got that throat. It was a result of having been rejected by the mainstream girls at Fontanet that made me crave attention, any kind of attention, adverse or otherwise. I discovered by now that the real purpose of this finishing school was as a dumping ground for girls who'd come from wealthy, broken homes. Apart from me, they were all the victims of bitter divorces and the subject of dislike or jealousy by vindictive new trophy stepmothers who, in some cases, were not much older than the girls themselves. Despite all the money these girls' families had, they had suffered their own private hells of neglected upbringing, mainly by nannies, and definitely not the kind, cheerful, warm Zulu ones I'd had, but vicious women like Mrs. Bannatyne, our farm manager's wife, and who was supposed to be our governess and teacher, who had been caretakers and often governesses and tutors to these girls, usually long before adolescence. If their mothers had run off with another man early on, the wicked stepmother syndrome had run rife through these unfortunate teenage girls' childhoods, leaving them bitter and rebellious towards life and people in general. They were too old to stay in school, none having gained good enough grades to go on to tertiary education, as I had miraculously done by passing my matric. But they were also too young, at 17 and 18, to be turned loose into the world with no qualifications that could get them employed, however superficially. So the 20-odd girls I spent so many months with at Fontanet was simply marking time by infighting and avoiding any kind of commitment to the courses half-heartedly on offer, as nobody was required to attend meals, let alone classes. I drifted along with them. It should have been my ideal environment, the one I'd longed for my 6 years of purgatory at boarding school, where I'd longed to be left alone to my own devices, resting, reading and writing letters to Gary and my other childhood best friend, Andy, with nothing and nobody to interrupt me. But I'd just recently come from what I now realized had been the perfect existence, structured outdoor life of skiing and learning to speak fluent French with convivial companions, and the comfort of knowing that Silette, Monsieur, and even Pierre would keep me safe from any harm. I'd had goals then of winning medals and finding myself a boyfriend, like the other two girls had. Nice, dependable and protective, slightly older boys who would also look after me. I'd been eating properly for the first time in my life, enjoying well-balanced meals and sleeping like a log after all that fresh air and hard physical exercise. I had blossomed at the Anchos and was now sliding back into a lonely, unhappy, listless apathy. Through my and Uta's constant bunking out, either before or just after supper, I did obtain a boyfriend of sorts. He was Salvatore, a Swiss-Italian waiter at some bar on the shorefront of beautiful twinkling Lake Geneva, and his shift always seemed to be finishing just as Uta and I hit town. After quite a few drinks and cigarettes, he'd join in with whatever spectacle we were making of ourselves that night, making a disgraceful public display of ourselves in the ornamental fountains. And then he'd follow me home to the school gates, where, after plenty of smooching, we parted company. One day he brought me an armful of 7 single records of the latest European, mainly French, top pop hits of that month. They were on loan, he explained, and I was to enjoy them until I had to move on, or he did. I sat in the common room, often with several other girls, with our coffee and pain chocolat, which was something else new to me, and which the other girls adored, simply French bread with chocolate chopped into it. They gobbled it down in great quantities, as it was provided on big trays every afternoon, along with our hot drinks. I wasn't a great fan of chocolate other than Toblerone, and I certainly didn't like it embedded in thick chunks of dry baguette. My new contribution of Salvatore's borrowed record collection, and giving away my share of the pain chocolat, made me slightly more appealing to my fellow classmates, and a couple of them began inviting me out for early afternoon walks into town to do a bit of sightseeing and shopping. Sorry. Without a guide of any kind, the sightseeing became a desultory meander throughout the various monuments and local attractions, and then into a cafe or bar to have a smoke and drink, and, inevitably, flirt with the waiters. Or they went shopping, or so I thought, when I went into the various shops with them, as they drifted in and out, buying the odd little thing, like a pack of ciggies or a bar of chocolate. Then all my old fears were realized, when these girls, sometimes in groups of up to 4, revealed their spoils. They were all shoplifting like crazy. The fashion in the late 60s was silk headscarves, big oval dark glasses, a bit like Jackie Kennedy's, and huge hand-woven soft basket-type bags, which they hung over their left shoulders, thus leaving the right hand to swipe as many items as they could grab and shove into their capacious bags. As before, the group used me as a decoy, and stupidly and unknowingly I'd fallen into their trap once again. I only discovered all this when I saw one of my roommates emptying a vast pile of goods onto her bed. Again, long-playing records, cartons of cigarettes, bottles of wine, and all kinds of clothing and jewellery, all with the price tags still on. Again, I learned to hang around outside any shops, while this lot and any other group, especially Uta, who was the most consummate shoplifter I'd ever come across, was inside committing these heinous crimes. I wondered, too, at the complete innocence and naivety shown by all the Swiss shopkeepers I'd encountered, in trusting what appeared to be a small group of extremely well-off young ladies, clearly from one of the many finishing schools in the Lake Geneva area. It would have been as puzzling to them as it was to me as to what motivated these wealthy girls to commit the crime that could get them either jailed or deported. What a risk to take for a few unwanted trinkets. I began to see that boredom was one of the factors in the case of the Fontenette girls. Lack of any challenge from any aspects of their day-to-day lives. And I was becoming a victim to that myself. Although in Britta and Jonty's case, I'll never know what turned them into thieving criminals, other than peer pressure at school many years before. Apart from my weekly cordon bleu lessons, I did nothing but sunbathe in my new microscopic black French bikini, reading on the roof of the cookery classroom wing, which was only accessible by hopping through a small window, which never seemed to be shut. We also used to climb out of this useful little skylight after our bedtime lights were supposed to be out, all made up and in our trendiest clothes, headed for town. From the roof, it was simply a matter of descending a conveniently placed drain pipe on the corner. Coming back, we climbed up a trellis on the outside of the classroom wall, sometimes so drunk we fell off and had to try again, loudly shushing each other's giggles and hiccups as we staggered about in the flower bed. My tree climbing skills on the farm and being able to clamber up Mort's rope in the gym now served me very well. And I was able to show Uta and the occasional other revelers how to achieve even greater heights. That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it. Goodbye.